This week in Billionaires, the reclusive banking scion and Trump megadonor Timothy Mellon is reportedly behind the $130 million gift to help the federal government pay members of the military during the shutdown, according to the New York Times, which cited two anonymous sources. When he announced the donation, President Trump described the donor as a friend who didn't want publicity. Mellon had previously donated $152 million to Trump's campaigns, and has now spent at least $504 million on politics, more than half of his estimated net worth. New York City mayoral frontrunner Zohran Mamdani, a Democratic socialist, is facing fierce resistance from some of the nation's wealthiest figures. Mamdani, who has explicitly stated that he does not think billionaires should exist, is running on a left-wing agenda that includes freezing rent. To stop him, 26 billionaires and members of billion-dollar families have collectively sunk over $22 million into opposition campaigns supporting candidates like former Governor Andrew Cuomo. The spending is led by former New York Mayor Michael Bloomberg, who has contributed a massive $8.3 million, along with hedge funder Bill Ackman and Airbnb co-founder Joe Gebbia. The White House East Wing was fully demolished, making way for President Trump's new $300 million ballroom. The project is being funded by private donors and several billionaires and members of billionaire families, including sugar baron Jose Pepe Fanjul, oil tycoon Harold Hamm, Blackstone co-founder Stephen Schwarzman, crypto moguls Cameron and Tyler Winklevoss, the family of Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, and Small Business Administration Administrator Kelly Loeffler and her husband Jeff Sprecher. Welcome to Beyond the Billions. I'm Giacomo Tognini, and joining me today is Will Yakowicz, a senior writer at Forbes. Will, welcome. You cover, I think, one of the most interesting beats at Forbes, Vices, and I remember a time that you and I visited the apartment, very nice apartment of a billionaire, and there was magic mushroom wallpaper on the ceiling, I think?
Yes. That was Christian Angermeyer's place on the Upper East Side, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah, he invests in psychedelics, so he also had like all these, ancient statues, to the gods and mushroom statues. It's
dinosaur collection too, right?
He has fossils.
Yeah,
he has a little operation out west where he digs for fossils too.
So how did you come to cover such an interesting beat and sort of unpack it a little bit, if you can?
Yeah, so I started my career as a crime reporter in Brooklyn right after college and, covering murders and fires and all that kind of stuff. And then when I got into business reporting, it was around 2014, and Colorado was the first state to launch a recreational marijuana market. So I started covering that, and then when I got to Forbes, I pitched this beat, like, look, we have billionaires investing in marijuana, we have publicly traded companies and startups, so it's kind of the entire ecosystem that Forbes cares about. And also, there's this phenomenon that I think everybody kind of sees, but once in everybody's lifetime, once in a generation, we see a huge market that originated in the black market transition to the legal market. My grandparents saw prohibition come and go,
right,
and then my parents saw gambling go from a mob-controlled racket to, Las Vegas City, which it is today, and now we get to see the marijuana industry, $100 billion illicit economy slowly go into state-by-state regulated sales.
And what's sort of the most interesting experience you think you've had? Because, right, like as you mentioned, you're covering cannabis, tobacco, gambling, alcohol, kind of like a vices beat, right? But what's been the most interesting? I mean, I know you've had a lot, but
yeah, there's a lot to choose from.
I know you've talked to Tucker Carlson, Mike Tyson, I think, right? A bunch of colorful
Cheech and Chong, you name it. Probably the most interesting thing that I witnessed was a couple years ago, I was writing a cover story for Forbes about how the marijuana market is broken. Like inherently, it's broken. It's still illegal at the federal level, and now we have up to 40 states that allow some either medical, recreational, or both,
right,
and 25 of them are allowing anybody over 21 to buy marijuana legally, in these legally in quotes. But what was most interesting, I was in this farm, on this farm in Humboldt, a legacy farm, so meaning this farm started out as a illicit operation. They were running from helicopters back in the day, and now they have a license. And the operator, this guy Johnny Casale, was taking like about 50 pounds of marijuana that was good weed, especially from anybody on the East Coast would think. But, you know, the market is so flooded. There's so much product on the market in California, and there are under 2,000 dispensaries for the entire state. So that means there's this race to the bottom. So, like, the best weed, you know, prices per pound went from over $3,000 years ago to now a couple $100 per pound.
Wow.
So he hit this specific crop was good weed, but it wasn't great. And so he realized he wasn't going to be able to sell it at a profit. He was going to sell it at a loss. So he would basically be paying for the opportunity to sell weed at a loss. So he put it all in a wood chipper and just wrote it off as complete, you know, the product was not good enough to bring to market. And so that, to me, to see 50 pounds of high-grade marijuana not good enough for the California market, just be like, okay, we're going to put it literally in the wood chipper.
Wow.
Yeah.
And he wouldn't be able to export it to a different
No,
state
you
legally,
can't.
right?
So
Yeah.
it's like you can do anything in this world, right? But there are consequences.
Yeah.
So there's a lack of interstate commerce,
Right.
meaning you can't grow weed in California and sell it in New Jersey. You can't cross state lines with the product, and which is weird because, you know, our orange juice comes from oranges grown in Florida, right? So it'd be like you have to you live in New Jersey, you live in New York, your orange juice needs to be made from oranges grown in those states.
Right.
So yeah, it was like the wood chipper anecdote just, you know, illustrated how broken this economy is. And it really is. It starts at the top. It's federally prohibited. So there's a tax code that penalizes drug traffickers, right? So their top line taxes could be 60% or greater off gross revenue because they can't take normal business deductions. Right. And then the state, you know, sees this as a cash cow, just as, you know, states tax all vices at high rates. And so you have a situation where there's not enough retail stores to sell all the product that is grown in the state. So, and then the taxes are so burdensome that this keeps the black market alive. You know, this guy, Johnny Casale, this farmer in Humboldt, chose not to do business in the black market, but a lot of these companies have to, or else they are closing their doors. So there's a very porous nature between the legal and the illicit market, and then there's a gray market in between.
Right. Well, I guess speaking of sort of state regulations and changing laws, you recently had this great story about the casino wars in New York.
Yeah.
And how we've, you know, all these different bidders. How did the race sort of look like initially? What's actually going on? And then, just catch us up a little bit, I guess.
Yeah. So New York announced a couple years ago that they are willing to issue up to 3 licenses for full casinos. So right now in the state of New York, there are casinos. They're upstate. You know, Catskills, Saratoga, Springs, and elsewhere. But in the city, in the 5 boroughs, there is no full casino. There's 2 facilities. One, Resorts World, which is owned by Genting, the billionaire Lim Kok Thay's company, and then MGM has a facility in Yonkers. And both of these facilities are what is referred to as Racinos. So they're on a thoroughbred horse track, and they allow what's called video lottery terminals. So it's basically video gambling machines. So there's no live dealers, there's no poker rooms, there's just these basically video game gambling terminals. And what's interesting is that Resorts World is one, even though Resorts World in New York, which is at the Aqueduct in Queens, is one of the best performing casinos in the U.S.
Wow.
They've consistently hit around $1 billion between their video gaming machines and the horse betting. So there's these 2 facilities in New York, and so now the New York State Gaming Commission has decided to issue 3 licenses and for full-blown gaming, that means poker rooms, live dealers, just like Las Vegas style casinos. So almost every company, every gaming company of prominence has tried to get into New York, and we've seen almost every company fail or drop out. So, Las Vegas Sands, they had sold all their properties in Vegas a couple years ago to Apollo,
Right.
and they kept their Macau and Singapore locations. So they pitched coming to Long Island at the Nassau Coliseum. They dropped out early. Wynn partnered with related companies which developed Hudson Yards. They were going to bring a casino to the west side of Manhattan.
The part that's still sort of undeveloped, right?
Yeah,
the rail
exactly.
yards there.
Yeah. And they dropped out because they just hit too many roadblocks with the community. And then Caesars partnered with Jay-Z and Rock Nation to bring something to Times Square, but the Broadway League is obviously very powerful there. They did not want a casino. They couldn't pass the first hurdle, which is community support. So it's a two-pronged kind of litmus test. Like, does the community support the project? If they don't, you're done. If they do, then eventually the New York State Gaming Commission will vote on the project. And then you have other people. There was a proposal on Coney Island, and that did not pass the community. There was probably the biggest uproar. Like, I think Times Square and Coney Island, those two communities really didn't want it. Another billionaire, Stefan Solovev, had a proposal. He has a tract of, I think, 6 acres of undeveloped land near the UN on the east side of Manhattan. That didn't pass the community portion. And so now there are only 4 players. Actually, no, there are only 3 players left. So, because MGM dropped out a couple weeks ago on October 15th.
MGM is the one in Yonkers.
Yes, yeah, they dropped out. And, what's interesting is most people on the periphery thought, that this is analysts, local politicians, thought MGM and Resorts World were a shoo-in.
Because they already have those Racinos. So
And they've been in the community for years. And the thinking is if they don't get a full casino license, their businesses will go bust.
Because of competition from these new casinos.
Like if you had the choice to go to a video slot machine or an actual slot machine and play poker or play blackjack with a live dealer, you're probably going to do that. So MGM dropped out. Then they cited there was they were thinking of getting a 30-year lease, but they realized they could only get a 15-year lease, and so the calculus just didn't work for them. They're investing billions of dollars and plan to make $1 billion or more a year. So on a 30-year time frame, that's great, but on a 15-year time frame, that stops making sense. Who we have left is Steve Cohen and Hard Rock have partnered to bring a humongous redevelopment project next to Citi Field. Basically, turn a parking lot into a casino, meeting space, parkland that would essentially connect Corona Park and Citi Field, the Billie Jean King's Tennis Center, all the way to the Bay.
Yeah. There's been a lot of plans for how to redevelop that area.
Yeah, exactly. And that he's proposing like an $8 billion development project. And then we have Bally's in the Bronx on what was formerly known as Trump Links, the golf course that Trump leased right in the Bronx there. And then there is Resorts World still in the race too. So Resorts World, Steve Cohen, and Bally's.
So Manhattan is out completely, right? It's just Queens and
completely out. Yeah.
Okay. So with Manhattan out, right? I think all those projects were dropped because of community support.
Yeah.
That wasn't there. Why do you think that happened? I mean, you mentioned that sort of Times Square was the Broadway League, but even the other projects failed. What were sort of beyond the controversy of having a casino? Do you think there were other reasons why these projects failed to win over the local communities?
I think traffic is a major thing.
Especially with congestion pricing and all that.
Yeah, exactly. And can you wrap your head around in a place like Times Square? You have Broadway. Can you imagine a casino and what it would do, and also the size of a casino. Like, you can't have a sprawling, humongous place with parking lots and humongous amounts of square footage. So, like, is it big enough to generate enough tax revenue to satisfy not only politicians but the community and the city and the state, right? So you need a lot of space. A place like Coney Island, which is a storied, the America's playground, right?
Right.
What would that do? The casino renderings were like, if you ever have gone to Coney Island, it was like Nathan's was just this like small dot in this humongous monstrosity.
Yeah.
And I just think, the stigma of gambling is real. People claim that it increases crime. Obviously, people spend money at casinos, and it's kind of the marketing of a casino has changed, that it's now entertainment, right? So it's like you spend money on a ticket to a concert. What's the difference between spending money at a slot machine? And obviously, addiction is probably the main difference in problem gambling. But yeah, I think it's just a mix of those factors that, and Manhattan is a really difficult place to get anything done, right? To build a building, if you don't have enough affordable housing, like, the community is going to have a problem with that, and developers have to placate all parties. So Manhattan is uniquely difficult.
I mean, Hudson Yards is a great example, right? It took them forever to build it, and then even though you had that, they're, with Related having built that and trying to develop it, and obviously Billionaires involved there too, right? Stephen Ross and Bruce Beal. It's such a tall order, right? Like you said,
it is. And even like if you look at non-casino related, just like you said with Hudson Yards, I mean, the waterfront in Dumbo along Brooklyn, that started in the 80s. It recently finished. So building anything in New York is hard, and when you add something as stigmatized as gambling, it's going to be even more difficult.
And if we look at the other bids that have dropped out, right, I was curious to dig a bit more into what happened with MGM. You mentioned it was that 15 and 30 release difference.
Yeah.
Is that not something they would have known before? How did that play out where the financials changed?
Yeah, one of the major, like, all the details are not hammered out. So even like the tax rate has not been decided yet.
The commission hasn't revealed that yet. Okay.
And so these details are slowly coming in. And, for sports betting, when sports betting was legalized in New York, the tax rate was 50%, which is crazy. So a lot of these operators in New York that brought sports books to the state realized, like, we need to be in New York because it's New York. And, it's basically like a form of marketing. Like, we're in New York. People were driving across the GWB or taking the path to Jersey City just to place bets on the Jersey in New Jersey, because New Jersey legalized first. So, a lot of these decisions, there's always fear of tax revenue going to a neighboring state. So, like, the push to bring a casino in Manhattan was like, look, casinos are dotted all around the New York border. We need to have first it was sports betting a couple years ago. Now we need to have a casino in order to keep tax revenue in the state.
It's kind of interesting, a comparison kind of to marijuana as well, right? I believe, I don't know if New Jersey legalized before, but I remember the same conversations happening.
Yeah, exactly. And when you look at states that don't have recreational marijuana, like Pennsylvania, like every new legislative session, a lot of politicians are saying, like, our residents are just spending their money in New York or New Jersey. So you get this situation where a state is surrounded by other states that have this not new to their state, or something that doesn't exist in their state, and we need to hold on to our tax revenue because we're just seeing our residents go elsewhere.
Right.
So it's this idea, and Vice's has always been, like, the legalization of the lottery was pitched as, like, do we want to cover the whole Board of Ed budget with lottery? And that was kind of how, you saw starting in the 70s, all these states decided to legalize the lottery to subsidize and fully fund Board of Ed budgets, and that did not play out. It's like makes up 2% of the BOE budget. So there's these humongous proposals and projections. In New York for the casinos, for example, each property is saying they will make over $1 billion a year. But if you look at the map and where all these, if the Gaming Commission does give 3 licenses, is there $3 billion a year to be made? Or are you going to see properties like, Resorts World? There was once they opened at the Aqueduct in 2011, after a few years you hit your high point and then you revenue starts going down. And you see it in, the biggest gambling hub in the world is in Macau. And, they're close to $30 billion a year in gross gaming revenue compared to Las Vegas, which is around $9 billion a year.
Wow, that much bigger.
Yeah.
Wow.
Macau is huge. It's the epicenter of gambling. So, the question is can the city sustain 3 casinos? No one knows. And then what is the tax structure going to be like, which will obviously make a huge difference in a company's margins.
I don't know how you can even make a business plan without knowing the exact. I mean,
it's a very important
even a
factor.
5 to 10% change could drastically alter it, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
And I guess going back to the 3 that are still active, we've mentioned so many billionaires who were in and dropped out, right?
Yep.
Stephen Ross, Stefan Sloviev, and others. What's the relationship with the Bally's proposal in the Bronx and the fact that it was on a golf course formerly owned by or leased by Trump? What sort of does he stand to gain? I guess anything from
yes,
this?
He does. So Sue Kim, who's the chairman of Bally's and runs a hedge fund called Standard General based in New York. So after January 6th, New York State wanted to cancel all the leases that President Trump owned.
Mm-hmm.
So Bally's put up their hand and said, we're willing to buy Trump links.
Mm-hmm.
So they started negotiating and made a deal, $60 million now. You can do whatever you want with the golf course, so they renamed it Bally's. Going over the Whitestone Bridge, you would see, in hedges, it was said Trump links, and it became a flashpoint, especially after J6 for protests and everything. So Bally's definitely did come and help New York at its request, which was they wanted to rid President Trump of all his leases. But how the deal was structured was that if they do win a license for a casino, they will have to pay President Trump's organization $115 million. And, I've heard things on both sides, look, Trump had that lease for 15 years. It was his deal to negotiate. And this was the deal that happened. And if you look at, say, Bally's does win a license, one of Trump's companies makes $115 million, the city will make, much more than that. Bally's is projecting hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue per year.
Mm-hmm.
So, there isn't a situation where President Trump's organization makes more money than New York State does.
Right.
It's just the nuances of the deal and the reality that he had this long-standing lease.
And is that a lump sum payment to him, or is it going to be sort of paid
I
out
don't
over?
know how that'll be structured. But yeah, so some people in the process are saying that's an Achilles heel for Bally's, but it remains to be seen. I think at the end of the day, the New York State Gaming Commission is going to be looking at these proposals individually and based on the merits of the proposal and which one can, as they say, serve the public interest the best. And that's up to the commission.
And now there's only 3 bidders left, right?
Yeah.
I know the commission can give up to 3 licenses.
Yeah.
In your reporting and talking to people who are looking at this, do you expect it now to give 1 to each of these 3 bidders? Do you expect it to be less than 3? What do you think is going to happen that way?
Yeah, I mean, this is like crystal ball
right?
time.
Yeah.
But, no one knows what's going to happen. But the thinking is that they're going to issue at least 1 license.
Okay.
And some people say they said, they do have up to 3, and they're going to issue all 3. But yeah, no one knows what'll happen. They could issue 0, they could issue 1 or 2, or they could issue 3. The state can just decide, there is only one project that is going to serve the public interest right now, and we'll save two for later. So we'll have to see how it plays out.
And I know the commission chairman had said that there's no front runners or favorites,
Yeah.
but I know for a long time, like you were talking about before, there was the expectation that MGM and Resorts World would have the upper hand. Do you think now that Resorts World is the only Racino left in the game, that they still have an upper hand on Bally's and the Steve Cohen project?
That's what some people that I've talked to say. I mean, most people, most analysts, most politicians that their districts touch any of these locations still believe that Resorts World does have an advantage. But yeah, O'Dwyer, the chairman of the state's gaming commission, has explicitly said there are no front runners. Like, it's tabula rasa. It's a blank slate. No one has an advantage at all. And seeing MGM drop out this late in the game, I believe that is the case. Like, I believe that they, if they were truly, in fact, a front runner and they believed that themselves, I think they would have held on.
Right, they would have figured out some way to make the math work.
Yeah, but they looked at the map, they realized 15-year lease, this isn't worth it. And, MGM is a humongous company. I think they're almost at like $20 billion a year in terms of revenue and have, close to 20 gaming locations around the country and Mexico and Canada. So, losing New York is a big deal because it is currently the biggest opportunity in gaming, especially in the U.S., but really in the world right now. New York is the kind of the hottest opportunity. You have big states that don't allow casinos yet, or at least commercial casinos. In this industry, there are tribal casinos, and which California has many of those. But Texas is, they have for years have been going back and forth. Like, do we allow casinos? Do we allow sports betting? That has not played out yet. And California. So those two states are kind of the big ones that are still up for grabs if laws change. So New York is the hottest opportunity. But going back to the front runners, the supposed front runners, that is, I really don't think there are. I think this process is just gonna, and we'll see how it plays out. But I do think it really depends on what the state gaming commission believes.
And so if we're looking at the I guess community support and ambassadors for the the bids that are still in play, Nas, who grew up in Queens, is with the Resorts World bid. Steve Cohen, billionaire, well-known owner of the Mets, with the one in near Flushing and Wills Point. How important do you think that's going to be now in the home stretch? This kind of support that they have.
Yeah, that it's. I mean, all three projects, like Sue Kim grew up in Queens too, so all three projects do have someone attached to those bids who is a New Yorker.
Yeah.
So there is no kind of advantage there, and whether or not star power with Nas has something to do with it, I frankly don't think the star power will tip the scales. I really do think it's, at the end of the day, which location and which proposal will benefit New York in terms of tax revenue, jobs, and community reinvestment. All of these projects have pledged some amount, big amount of money, actually, like tens of millions of dollars, to reinvest in the community, either through nonprofits and foundations or helping, infrastructure and transportation, like Citi Field. Steve Cohen and Hard Rock's bid is pledged a lot to revamp transportation. So yeah, I don't think the star power, or even now that every bid has a New Yorker attached to it or running the show, is gonna kind of tip the scales either way.
And how important do you think the location is? I guess just as
Yeah.
I live in Queens, full disclosure, but I think it seems like getting to the one in Citi Field maybe seems easier, but then I don't know if having more space perhaps over the aqueduct or in the Bronx makes more sense for parking.
Yeah.
Like, how, I guess, does that play a big role in it, do you
I
think?
think it probably will.
Yeah.
I think location has a lot to do with it. A lot to do with the future success of a project, but also like daily life. Like, is it going to disrupt traffic in that area? is there a free flowing corridor to these sites.
Yeah, and I guess let's say they were all approved. Like,
Yeah.
I imagine they wouldn't all be earning equally, right? People would end up going more to one.
Yeah,
or
there'll
the other.
probably be, like in any gambling hub like Vegas, there are better performing casinos, and then there are casinos that, kind of go towards a different type of customer. Billionaire Phil Ruffin owns Circus and Treasure Island. That's on the lower end of the economic strata in terms of the types of customers they attract, whereas like the Wynn is for high rollers.
Right.
So it really depends on how these projects play out, and then consumer choice. Like people will, if there are three, people will be able to choose. And but I will say I lived in Rockaway on the beach for years, and I passed by Resorts World every day, and that place is busy all the time.
Wow. So I guess, do you have a preference for where you'd want to?
I don't. No. I mean, I'm a paid observer in all of this, and so I'm just fascinated by the process and by the players duking it out, and I don't really have an opinion on where I think one should be. I think each project has a very compelling pitch.
And I guess just to wrap things up, but you mentioned earlier that Macau is, I think, 30 billion.
Yeah,
right?
around there. Yeah, under but close to 30 billion.
And Vegas around 9. I guess.
Yeah.
How big do analysts expect the New York market to be?
Yeah.
Obviously, so much uncertain still, but how big is that opportunity potentially?
Yeah, the analysts I've spoke to, everyone, the caveat being like we don't know what the tax rate is.
Yeah.
But, New York being the most densely populated city in America, and with the other part of the Venn diagram is that it has the most people with the highest amount of wealth. They do think like $1 billion a year is not an unreasonable projection for revenues. So margins is a separate topic, which we will figure out that later on. But there is a consensus that a casino in New York City is going to do very well.
Yeah. And then we're expecting a decision by December, right?
Yeah.
Sometime this year.
Yep. Yeah, by the December 1st. So it's coming up very quick.
Yeah, it'll be really fascinating to see that happen, and I know you'll be covering it, so I urge everyone watching to follow your stories. But it's been really interesting to talk about this, and thanks so much for coming on, Will.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Giacomo.
You can read Will's article and the other articles mentioned today in the show notes.